Did you hear that crowd? The Coliseum. Because this is what they believe in. Power.
Ridley Scott is 86 years old, and he is pumping out movies almost yearly on these grand epic scales, making so many films like there's no tomorrow. I think he's almost up to 30 directed features in his entire career, starting in the 1970s. And look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you everything Ridley Scott has ever done is amazing. He's got some stinkers in his filmography. However, his best films are some of the best films ever made. You got Alien, you got Blade Runner, you got Prometheus, you got Legend, you've got Kingdom of Heaven, and of course you have the original Gladiator, which some people would say is his best film, and some people would say is one of the best films ever made. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture way back in the year 2000 when I was a young lad, and I even remember the hype around that movie when I was, what was I, like 9, 10 years old? I don't know. I remember being a kid, and I remember seeing the commercials for it all the time. I remember when my parents rented and watched it, and I sort of watched like pieces of it that they, allowed me to see. And this was a big movie. And to do a sequel to Gladiator, well, that's just a huge risk in general because, well, one, if you see the ending of Gladiator, I mean, Russell Crowe's not coming back. And then also to, take that chance of tainting that legacy of that one big standalone film of just Gladiator. It's like it's an epic movie. It was never a franchise. It was never sequelized. It was never remade. It gets to kind of stay on this pedestal of luxury, in the filmmaking world. It's just one of those films that came out that people will never forget, right? And there's been so many imitators ever since. But now, 24 years later, Ridley Scott was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to make another Gladiator movie. But he's been trying to make this movie for quite some time. And in interviews that I've seen from him, as well as him talking about the first Gladiator, it seemed like there were things that he wanted to do in that first Gladiator film that at the time it came out in the year 2000, he just didn't have the technology or the means or the resources to fully do everything that he had imagined. So I kind of look at this film in one of two ways. One is that this is an excuse for Ridley Scott to jump back into that world and do some of the bigger scale stuff that he wasn't able to do in the first movie. Bigger action sequences, filling the Coliseum with water and throwing sharks in there. Why not? We'll get to that. But also, I think that it might be a little bit of a look back on his own legacy, because legacy is a big theme of this movie. And I don't think the film is like self-indulgent or anything like that. I don't think Ridley Scott's like, ooh, look at me being an artistic filmmaker. Like, the film is very much straightforward, exactly what you think it's going to be. If you're a fan of this style of film, or if you're a fan of the first movie, you've watched the trailer, you probably know everything that's going to happen in this movie, more or less. But I do find the thematic idea interesting of kind of looking back on the past and the things that you weren't capable of doing or achieving in the past, and that maybe, future generations can kind of push this forward, push this idea forward that the older generations were hoping for, that eventually you would get to. Maybe you aren't quite as capable of doing something right now, but maybe if you keep that hope and you keep that dream alive, you pass it to the next generation, eventually somebody will be that driving force to bring your dream home. Maybe I'm looking into the movie way too deeply when I shouldn't, when there's like a scene with a bunch of rabid baboons fighting gladiators and they're all made of CGI. So maybe I shouldn't be looking into it that deeply. But I don't know. I feel like I'm always a sucker for movies about legacy and longevity and stories of, previous generations, fathers and sons, like that sort of thing. So I don't know. Maybe I'm seeing too much into this movie. I don't know. Now I'll get this right out of the way, right off the bat. This movie in no way, shape, or form holds a candle to the original. The original is way better. It will forever be a timeless film that you can go back and watch, and it will always feel of epic scale, great quality, with fantastic acting performances by Russell Crowe, Joaquin Phoenix, everyone else that's in the movie. It is just one of those time capsule, timeless kind of films. Gladiator 2 is definitely not that. Although I do find it to be very entertaining. Am I not entertained? I was pretty entertained. But I will say, if you're going into this movie and you're attempting to compare it and contrast it to the original, well, at that point, just expect to be disappointed because it's never going to reach those highs. But I also don't think that it's necessarily trying to. I think that it really is just trying to bring forth some of the ideas that were not capable of being achieved in the first movie, but not trying to be better than it in any way. Just what it is, a sequel, a continuation. It's really hard to compare when you have Russell Crowe giving maybe the best performance of his entire career, and in this film you have the actor Paul Mescal, who is doing a good job, but he's just not Russell Crowe at his peak, It's like he's doing the best that he can. I think his character is fine. You understand his motivations and who he is, and I'll try to keep this as spoiler-free as I can, even though there's things that I don't really think are spoilers that might be spoilers, but regardless, like, he does a pretty decent job for what he's given, but it just doesn't have the same amount of emotion as the first Gladiator. And I think that it does try to incorporate that emotion. It does try to incorporate that personal journey that he's going through, but it just falls short of the original in that regard. There is emotion there, but it doesn't reach those levels. So once again, kind of temper your expectations if you are hoping it to reach the highs of the original Gladiator, because it absolutely does not. But taken on its own merits, the storyline of this new main character was fine. It was good. It worked for the movie. It's not spectacular, but there is a really cool dynamic here between the main character and Pedro Pascal's character, who of course has been in a gladiator type of arena before in Game of Thrones, and he may end up in another one in this movie. And they have a really good sort of back and forth going on here, where this is basically the Pedro Pascal's character is working for the Roman army, and he's getting the fame, the recognition, the glory. But what you come to understand is that he doesn't quite want to be in the position that he's in, so he becomes a little bit more of a sympathetic character, which I wasn't quite expecting. If there's anything in the movie that kind of took me off guard, it might have been Pedro Pascal's character, because I wasn't expecting to feel the amount of sympathy that I did for him. So he gave a really great performance, and considering the situation that his character is in within the film, you do kind of feel for him, but there's really nothing you can do at that point. And it kind of leads you as the viewer to go on this dual path of these two characters that are destined to meet up at some point, and they both have very legitimate, significant reasons for doing what they're doing. The other standout is, of course, Denzel Washington, who is never not great in a movie. He is a little bit over the top, but I think that it works just fine because he is just having like so much energy in everything that he does. Like, he's a very maniacal kind of character, but he's also the person that's kind of pulling strings behind the scenes. He's not, there's like the two emperors, there's like two brothers that are the actual emperors right now. They're also wacky over the top. One of them has a pet monkey, which was pretty funny, actually. But Denzel Washington's character is more of the guy that, he gathers the gladiators, he kind of gets them ready for battle and all of that, but he's also got his hands in the pot of, like, all the different happenings all around Rome. Like, he's, attached to the two emperors at the time. He knows the guys that know the things that are happening behind the scenes. He knows when particular kidnappings or assassination attempts are going to happen. Like, he just has his hand in everything. And even though he's not the head honcho, he's basically working things behind the scenes. And it's really fun to see his charisma when he's talking to somebody face to face, and there's actually, even though they're having a conversation about one thing, you can tell behind the scenes he's actually inquiring about another thing. And again, some of his performances, I don't know if his mannerisms and the way that he spoke would have been how somebody would have spoken back then. Probably not, but Denzel just gives such a good performance that you kind of don't care. And that's the thing I want to get into too about this. So Gladiator 2 obviously takes place, in historical times during the Roman Empire. And when it comes to historical accuracy in films, I am not somebody that really gives too much of a shit about that. To me, if I want historical accuracy, I will watch a documentary. I will read a book. I will look into the actual Roman Empire when and if I feel interested to do so. When I'm watching a movie, what I care about is good characters and a good story. Now, having said that, I don't want something to happen as ridiculous as, okay, you're watching a movie taking place in ancient Roman times, and then all of a sudden, a Honda Civic drives by. Okay, that would take me out of the movie, because that would break the establishment of the kind of understand the verisimilitude of like what is real within this world, right? So as long as everything makes sense within the world of the story, so you're setting it in this time period, so it would make sense for technology to be what it was back then. And if you have any kind of advanced technology, at least kind of show and let us understand why it's happening. I can kind of go along with that. I don't need things to go 100% how they did in historical times. I don't need, every single piece of armor, every single sword to look 100% historically accurate. That stuff never bothers me. When I watch Inglourious Bastards and Hitler dies in the end, that doesn't bother me because I'm watching a movie. I'll look into real history if I want to, right? So when it comes to this movie, yes, some things are very exaggerated when it comes to the battle sequences, but I had a good time watching them, therefore I don't care. Sometimes in a movie, historical accuracy can be damned for the sake of good fun, as long as it still makes sense within the world of the movie, okay? For example, now I've heard this was true, that they would flood the Colosseum in order to reenact ship battles, right? And that happens in the movie. I love the way it is too, because there's like this training sequence with the main character like doing the rows, and he pisses somebody off, and he makes everybody else leaves the ship, and he has to do all the rowing himself, which, by the way, that's going to get your back like super jacked. Like, it's really good to do rows. Besides all that, they do that, and then immediately after that, it shifts into the Colosseum being flooded, and I'm like, that's like the perfect little setup there. But within this sequence, which I've heard is historically accurate, that they did flood the Colosseum from time to time to reenact these battles, they also add in a bunch of motherfucking sharks. I don't think that's historically accurate, but is it cool? Yeah, it's cool to watch, so fuck it. And I think all of that works. All of the Colosseum battles, I think there's like 4 big Colosseum moments. Obviously, it's called Gladiator, so that's kind of the biggest part of these movies, are all of these battles. And yeah, you do get, like I said, you get CGI monkeys, you get a big CGI rhinoceros. I was going to say triceratops. It looks like a triceratops. You get the sharks in the flooded Colosseum, and you get like general battles and things like that. So it is way more upscale, way more over the top than the original Gladiator fights, but all of it is pulled off very well. If there's one thing that Ridley Scott is also very good at, it's creating these epic scale giant battles. Napoleon, that came out last year, that movie was pretty awful, but all the battle sequences were great. So he's never lost his touch in that regard, and the fact that he's 86 years old and he's still capable of creating these giant battle sequences, I mean, that's enough to be praised right there. But having said all that, yes, none of it lives up to the original Gladiator. It's not going to be a timeless film. There's a lot of fun things in here. There's a lot of great things to enjoy. But at the end of the day, I think that this is a movie that you're probably either going to watch once or twice and maybe not come back to, at least not come back to the same way that you would the original Gladiator. Which, on that point, there is one more thing that I want to say, is that this is a legitimate sequel, taking place in the same universe as the original Gladiator, and there's lots of callbacks, particularly even in the opening credits of this movie. They show scenes from the original Gladiator, and they show even some scenes and some flashbacks throughout the film. So they're not trying to hide the fact, that this is Gladiator 2, and I would say, it would probably be worth it to rewatch the original Gladiator first, which I did not do, so there were some things that I was kind of piecing together as I was watching it. Everything is explained to you just fine. Like, I don't think you're going to be questioning anything, because everything is pretty on the nose, in the movie, but it would probably help to have a little bit of a reminder of everything that happened in the first Gladiator beforehand. This does take place a couple decades later, but all of that stuff in the first movie is important for this movie. Anyway, overall, I did enjoy the movie. I had a good time watching it. I was entertained while watching it, but it's not a movie that's going to stand the test of time for me. I'm not going to probably rewatch it that often. Definitely not as much as the original Gladiator. In the full spectrum of Ridley Scott's filmography, I'd say it's like mid-tier. You know, it's not in the top echelon of Ridley Scott movies, but it's also not his worst. You know, it's just kind of somewhere in the middle. Maybe it didn't need to be made, but then again, no movie really needs to be made, right? It's all here for our entertainment. So let me know what you guys thought of Gladiator 2. If you did see it down below, did you love it? Did you hate it? Did the historical inaccuracy just piss you off too much? You couldn't enjoy it? Or were you just not involved with the storyline? Because yeah, you know, it doesn't have the same kind of emotional weight as the first movie. It's a little bit more of kind of pure entertainment as opposed to the original where you really, really care about the characters. I do think, like I said, I think they tried, but it just didn't quite get there. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Leave all your thoughts and opinions. Thanks for watching this video. As always, guys, give it a thumbs up and a comment to help it out in the algorithm. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll talk to you next time.